Morning light spilled across the floor of Phoenix Sky Harbor, gliding over polished tiles and the steady stream of travelers making their way toward the security gates. It was the kind of morning older Americans know well. A little crowded, a little noisy, but comfortingly familiar. People heading off to see grandchildren. Couples taking one last trip before winter arrived. Everything felt ordinary, predictable, safe, until one sound broke through the routine. A sharp bark, then another. Copper, the Belgian Malinois known by nearly everyone at the airport for his gentle eyes and impeccable discipline, suddenly pulled his handler with a force that startled even him. His muscles tightened, his ears locked forward, his gaze fixed on a woman standing alone near the entrance to the checkpoint. She looked fragile, almost trembling, one arm wrapped tightly around what appeared to be a pregnant belly. Her face had the pale, exhausted look of someone carrying far more than weight. Yet Copper did not hesitate. He barked again, louder this time, causing a few people to gasp and step back. The woman pressed herself against the wall, whispering something no one could hear. A security officer rushed toward them. A small group of older travelers nearby froze, clutching their bags, unsure what the commotion meant. But Copper was not confused. He was not afraid, and he was not acting out of aggression. He was trying to warn them. David Morales, Copper's handler, felt the leash tighten like a coiled spring. He had worked with Copper long enough to know this was not a false alarm. There was a tension in Copper's stance that he had only witnessed a handful of times in his 12 years with the K-9 unit. A tension that meant danger was close. Danger that human eyes could not yet see. Copper's claws tapped urgently against the floor as he tried to move closer, his chest rising and falling with a kind of desperate certainty. Something about that woman, something hidden beneath the surface, was calling out to him in a way no one else understood. For a moment, the entire terminal seemed to hold its breath, and in that stillness, one truth became clear. Copper was not sounding the alarm to create fear. He was sounding it to save a life. Within minutes, what he sensed would unravel into a mystery no one in that building could have imagined. A moment of instinct that would change the fate of a woman who believed she was beyond saving. And a reminder that sometimes the guardians who protect us do not shout orders or flash badges. Sometimes they simply stand quietly at our side, waiting for the moment when their voice becomes the only one we should listen to. The morning at Phoenix Sky Harbor unfolded the way so many American mornings do, especially for those over 50 who have spent a lifetime passing through airports. There was a gentle rhythm to it all, the rolling hum of suitcase wheels, the steady announcements drifting from overhead speakers, the soft greetings exchanged between older couples traveling to see family they had not visited in far too long. It was a kind of scene that felt both ordinary and comforting, as though everyone shared a quiet understanding of what it meant to be on the move again. Sunlight spilled to the tall windows, painting warm stripes on the polished floors. A retired veteran wearing a cap covered in service pins moved carefully toward the security line. A grandmother held a small handmade blanket in her arms, bound for her daughter's house where a new baby had just arrived. Two old friends laughed softly as they tried to remember which gate was theirs. These were the small, familiar pieces of American life that made the airport feel less like a place of rushing and more like a crossroads of stories. And in the middle of this calm pulse of humanity walked Copper and his handler, Officer David Morales. Copper moved with the confidence of a dog who understood his purpose. Not hurried, not tense, just quietly attentive, ears turning at the faintest sound. Many travelers recognized him. Some reached out a polite hand for a quick pat. Older passengers especially seemed drawn to him, perhaps because they saw in Copper a symbol of steadiness, loyalty, and the kind of companionship that grows deeper with age. David, walking beside him, returned each smile with a nod. At 52, he looked like a man who had carried both hardship and responsibility, yet still held a gentleness beneath the uniform. He knew this crowd well. He understood how older Americans felt about travel, the mix of excitement and nervousness, the longing to see loved ones, the hope that the journey would go smoothly. He also knew that seeing a calm K-9 unit brought many of them reassurance. Most days on duty looked like this: predictable, controlled, a quiet watchfulness that rarely turned into anything more. But even in the familiarity of a morning like this, life has a way of changing direction in the space of a heartbeat. David sensed nothing unusual yet. Copper walked with an easy stride, pausing now and then to listen to a distant sound or catch a faint scent carried through the air. Everything seemed safe. Everything seemed as it should be. Neither of them knew that just a few steps away, hidden in the flow of travelers, someone was carrying a burden far heavier than any suitcase. A burden that Copper, with the instinct that had saved more than one life before, was only minutes away from detecting. A quiet morning in America was about to shift, and once it did, nothing in that terminal would feel ordinary again. Officer David Morales had the steady presence of a man who had spent decades in service, yet carried his experiences with a quiet humility. At 52, he moved with a deliberate calm, the kind that comes only from years of navigating difficult situations and learning how to stay grounded even when the world around him was not. He had joined the police force in his early 20s, full of energy and conviction, never imagining that his path would eventually lead him to the K-9 unit. But life, as David often reminded himself, rarely follows the straight roads we expect. It was after a long and painful chapter in his life that he ended up here, working beside Copper, the partner who had helped him heal in a way no one else could. David had lost his wife 6 years earlier. The illness came quickly and silently, and by the time they realized how serious it was, time had already slipped away from them. After her passing, the house felt impossibly quiet, the dinner table too empty, the evenings too long. People told him grief would soften, the ache would fade, but grief does not vanish. It only changes shape. And for a long time, David did not know what to do with the pieces it left behind. Copper changed that. When David first met Copper, the young dog had been labeled too sensitive, a little too alert, a little too overwhelmed by the world. But David understood that kind of sensitivity better than most. He recognized a look in Copper's eyes, a look that said the world had been heavy, but the heart was still willing. He sensed potential, not weakness. And in Copper, he found something unexpectedly familiar, a soul that felt deeply, a spirit that had been bruised, but not broken. Training Copper gave David a reason to get out of bed again. It brought purpose back into his routine. It reminded him that even in brokenness, there can be loyalty, bravery, and second chances. Over time, Copper became more than a K-9 partner. He became a companion who filled the quiet spaces in David's life, the steady presence he could rely on, the one being who sensed when David was having a hard day and would simply come sit at his feet, without needing to be asked. That bond made them one of the most trusted teams in the airport. Travelers often said David had a peaceful way about him, as though nothing could shake him. What they did not see was that Copper was a reason for that calm. When Copper was steady, David was steady. And when Copper reacted to something, David knew better than to ignore it. On this particular morning, as they walked the length of the security checkpoint, David felt that familiar partnership in every step. He nodded to the officers on duty, exchanged a few friendly words with an older couple heading to Minnesota, and let Copper take the lead as he always did. The routine felt easy, predictable, almost comforting. But David had learned, over years of working beside Copper, that the calmest mornings could turn into the most unforgettable days. All it took was a scent, a sound, or a signal, something Copper noticed long before any human did. And in just a few minutes, David would hear that signal, a bark that cut through the noise, a warning only Copper understood, and it would pull David into a situation that would test not only his training, but the deep bond he shared with his four-legged partner, the kind of moment that only happens once in a lifetime, the kind of moment that proves instinct can see what the eyes cannot. Copper's story did not begin with polished floors, security lines, or the steady rhythm of airport patrols. It began much earlier, on a quiet morning outside a small animal shelter on the edge of town. Someone had tied him to the front gate with a short length of rope and left before the staff arrived. When they found him, he was curled into himself, trembling slightly, too alert for a dog his age, watching every movement as if the world had already given him more reasons to fear than to trust. He was not aggressive. He was not untrained. He was simply overwhelmed. sensitive in a way few people understood. The shelter staff noted in his file, a little too anxious, easily startled, needs a calm handler. Words that could easily seal a dog's fate if the right person never came along. But Copper had something else too. In his eyes there was a spark that refused to go out, a desire to connect, a quiet intelligence waiting for someone patient enough to bring it forward. And that spark was what caught the attention of the K-9 selection team months later. Most police dogs are chosen for confidence and boldness. Copper had those qualities, but buried under uncertainty. What he lacked in early training, he made up for in instinct. His nose was exceptional, his focus unwavering when he sensed something important. Yet he needed a handler who spoke the same unspoken language he did. Someone who understood what it meant to feel deeply and still choose to stand tall. That person was Officer David Morales. When Copper first met David, he approached slowly, with careful steps and ears angled back in cautious curiosity. David knelt down, extended an open hand, and waited. No pressure, no demands, just patience. Copper took a breath, then placed his paw gently into David's palm, as if he were offering a fragile piece of himself. It was the beginning of a bond that neither of them could have predicted. Training Copper was nothing like training other dogs. He learned quickly, but he absorbed the world intensely. Loud noises startled him. Harsh commands shut him down. But calm guidance, steady routines, and gentle reinforcement allowed him to grow into the dog he was meant to be. David never rushed him, never raised his voice. He treated Copper not as a tool, but as a partner. And Copper responded with loyalty that was unwavering. Over time, his greatest vulnerability became his greatest strength. His sensitivity turned into intuition, his alertness into precision. He could detect subtle shifts in behavior that other dogs often missed. He could sense the stress long before chaos erupted. And he noticed when someone in the terminal was struggling internally, even if they showed no outward sign. Airport employees often joked that Copper had an old soul, as though he was not just watching the world, but understanding it. Older travelers especially were drawn to him. They would stop, look into his eyes, and say things like, "He feels things, doesn't he?" And David would smile because it was true. Copper felt deeply, and that depth was what made him remarkable. There was a quiet confidence in Copper now. He walked beside David with the awareness of a dog who had been broken once, but never allowed that brokenness to define him. He had been given a second chance, and in return, he gave everything he had to the people he served. On this particular morning, Copper appeared calm as he guided David through the security area, but inside him, the instincts that saved lives before were already awakening. He could sense shifts in the air, subtle and delicate, a scent that did not belong, a tension carried by one person among the hundreds moving around him. Copper did not know what it was yet, but he knew something was coming, and when the moment arrived, he would be ready. For a while, everything moved with the kind of gentle predictability people over 50 know well, that comforting sense of routine that says, life is steady today. The airport buzzed, but not in a frantic way, more like a steady hum, familiar and almost soothing. Copper trotted beside David with an easy stride, the leash resting loosely in David's hand. Nothing in Copper's movement hinted at alarm. Nothing in David's expression suggested worry. A group of older travelers waved as the pair passed. One woman leaned on her cane, smiling warmly as Copper glanced her way. Another man, wearing a faded jacket from his days in service, paused just long enough to give Copper a gentle nod. David slowed, offering a few words of greeting. It was these small connections that made the airport feel like more than lines and luggage. It felt like a community, a crossroads where stories intertwined. Copper enjoyed this part of the morning. The soft pats from familiar hands. The quiet, grateful voices saying, "Thank you for your service." Dogs, especially ones with Copper's sensitivity, sense honesty in people, and older Americans tended to carry a kind of openness that Copper understood. They approached him with respect, with kindness, with a gentleness earned through years of living. Copper responded with soft eyes and a calm tail, offering the kind of silent reassurance only a dog can give. David watched these interactions with quiet pride. He knew Copper had a rare gift, not just skill, but presence. a calming force in a place where people often felt rushed or anxious. And on mornings like this, when everything flowed smoothly, David felt grateful for the peace. The security lanes were moving steadily. The officers on duty exchanged light-hearted jokes. A family helped their elderly father load his belongings into a bin. A couple discussed their travel plans for their anniversary. The air smelled faintly of coffee from a nearby kiosk. It was the picture of a normal day, one that would never make headlines or be remembered for anything remarkable. And yet, sometimes the most unforgettable moments hide inside the mornings that appear completely ordinary. Copper paused for a second, nose lifting slightly as if catching a faint whisper in the air. David noticed a subtle shift, that tiny flicker of attention. But Copper relaxed a moment later and continued walking. David filed it away in the back of his mind. Years of partnership had taught him to trust even the smallest cues. But for now, everything still seemed perfectly routine. The calm felt stable, predictable, almost peaceful. But calm can be deceptive. Sometimes it is the last quiet breath before life changes direction, before instinct awakens, before a single moment pulls two lives, the handler and the dog, into a situation that tests everything they have learned together. In that morning stillness, neither David nor Copper knew the storm was already forming just steps away. That within minutes, Copper's instincts would snap into sharp clarity, that the ordinary rhythm of the day would shatter, replaced by a chain of events no one in that terminal would forget. For now, though, the world remained quiet, a calm heartbeat before the inevitable shift, the final breath of peace before the warning bark that would change everything. She appeared quietly, almost slipping into the flow of travelers without drawing attention at first. The kind of person you would normally pass in an airport without a second glance. But for Copper, for reasons no human could yet see, her presence rippled through the calm morning like a whisper of warning. The woman was in her mid-30s, with light brown hair pulled back into a loose knot and a long coat draped around her shoulders. She carried a small suitcase behind her, its wheels clicking softly against the floor. Her other arm wrapped protectively across what looked like a pregnant belly, rounded beneath a fitted sweater. She moved slowly, as if each step required intention. Not the natural heaviness of late pregnancy, but something more practiced, almost rehearsed. To anyone watching, she simply looked like a tired, expectant mother preparing to board her flight. A familiar sight, especially in a country where families are scattered across states, and air travel becomes the only way to stay connected. Many older Americans at the airport saw her and softened, offering small, polite smiles. None of them sensed anything unusual. But Copper did. From across the terminal, his ears flicked forward, his nose lifted, drawing in a scent that didn't match the crisp smell of coffee or the faint trace of perfume carried by nearby passengers. Copper slowed his stride, something rare for him, and stared with unwavering focus at the woman as she approached the security checkpoint. David noticed the shift immediately. Copper's body language changed from relaxed to alert in the space of a breath. His tail dropped slightly. His posture tightened. It wasn't fear or aggression. It was focus, pure instinct sharpening into clarity. David glanced in the same direction, but saw nothing out of place. Just a woman walking carefully, almost too carefully, toward the line. He watched her for a moment, expecting Copper's tension to ease as it sometimes did when he misinterpreted a sound or shadow. But Copper did not relax. The woman's movements, upon closer observation, had a stiffness to them. She avoided eye contact with the officers, kept her head low, and adjusted her coat repeatedly as though trying to hide the outline of her body. One of her hands shook faintly as she reached into her bag for her identification. When she bent slightly to lift her suitcase on a conveyor belt, she winced, her jaw tightening in a way that suggested not discomfort, but alarm. Still, these signs were subtle. A human might mistake them for nerves, exhaustion, or the discomforts of late pregnancy. But Copper sensed something deeper, something he had been trained to recognize, something he had seen before in different forms. Stress, fear, and beneath it, a scent that didn't belong on a person or in an airport at all. He pulled forward suddenly, strong enough that David had to brace himself. Copper let out a short, low bark, the kind he used only when he detected something he believed posed a threat. A few travelers near them looked over, startled by the sudden change in the dog's behavior. David whispered a firm command. Copper hesitated but didn't back down. His eyes never left the woman. Meanwhile, she moved closer to the X-ray machine. Her breathing seemed uneven now, too quick for someone simply navigating airport stress. She kept pressing her palm against the side of her belly as if trying to steady something inside or calm a sensation she couldn't control. One of the security officers approached her with a gentle smile, saying something that made her nod quickly, but her voice trembled when she responded. Her hand tightened around the handle of her carry-on. Her shoulders lifted, as though bracing against an invisible weight. Kappa's agitation rose with every second. He tugged again, harder this time, and barked sharply, startling two elderly passengers standing nearby. They stepped aside, watching with concern as Copper tried desperately to get closer to the woman. David tightened his grip, confusion flickering across his face. Copper was not a dog who overreacted. He didn't lunge. He didn't bark without purpose. Something was wrong, even if David couldn't yet see what Copper sensed. The woman heard the bark and froze. Her face drained of color. Her lips parted slightly as though she were about to say something, but lost the words. For a brief moment, her eyes met Coppa's. There was fear in them, real desperate fear, but not the kind directed at the dog. It was fear directed inward. Fear of whatever she was carrying, whatever she was caught inside of, whatever she felt she could not escape. She clutched her coat again, pulling it tight across her stomach. Her breathing hitched. A small tremor moved through her shoulders. David stepped forward just as Copper let out another bark, louder, more urgent, drawing the attention of more travelers and officers nearby. "Ma'am," David said gently, his voice steady but firm, "could you come with us for a moment?" The woman hesitated. Her eyes darted toward the gate, then toward the exit, as if mentally weighing her options. Her hand slid across her stomach once more, a gesture filled not with maternal protectiveness, but with dread. Finally, she nodded, slowly, reluctantly, and as two security officers stepped beside her, Coppa's tension eased only the slightest amount, though his eyes remained locked on her every movement. The moment she agreed to follow them, David felt a shift in the air. Something inevitable had set itself in motion. The calm morning had cracked open, revealing the first glimpse of the storm Copper had sensed long before any human knew it was coming. In that moment, David realized one thing with certainty. Copper was not reacting to the woman's fear. He was reacting to the danger she carried. And deep down, beneath all the confusion, David understood the truth he had learned again and again throughout his career. When Copper reacted like this, he was never wrong. What happened next unfolded so naturally, yet so urgently, that it felt like the airport itself shifted from routine to crisis, without anyone fully realizing when the change began. And it all started the moment the woman agreed, hesitantly, fearfully, to follow the officers into the private screening room. Copper watched every step she took, as though her next breath might hold the answer to the instinct pulling at him so fiercely. David walked beside Copper, the leash held steady in his hand. But there was a heaviness forming in his chest. A quiet voice he had learned to trust over decades on the job whispered that this moment mattered, that something invisible and dangerous had already woven itself around this woman's life. And Copper was the only one who had sensed it soon enough. The private screening room was a small, quiet space away from the hurried noise of the terminal. A single desk, a few chairs, a metal counter for inspecting bags, a closed door meant to give privacy to travelers who needed additional screening. But today, that room felt like a stage where something hidden was finally going to reveal itself. The woman sat down slowly, lowering herself into the chair as if her body no longer trusted its own strength. She kept one hand pressed firmly to her side, fingers trembling slightly. Her breathing was shallow, uneven, almost too quick. A female TSA officer spoke to her in a calm, gentle voice meant to soothe anxiety. "Ma'am, we just need a moment. This is routine. We'll check your belongings and make sure everything is okay." The woman nodded weakly, but she did not speak. Her eyes remained fixed on the floor, and every so often she flinched as if something deep inside her shifted painfully. Copper paced outside the door with a restless urgency David had not seen in him in years. His paws clicked rapidly across the tile, back and forth, his nose pressed against a thin line where the bottom of the door met the floor. Every few seconds, he would emit a soft whine, a sound that cut straight into David's stomach. "What is it, buddy?" David whispered, kneeling beside him. "What are you picking up?" Copper didn't look at him. He didn't blink. He stayed locked onto the faint scent coming from beneath the door, as if that small gap was the only window he had into a secret no one else could perceive. Inside the room, the TSA officer opened the woman's bag. At first glance, nothing seemed out of place. A folded sweater, a small toiletry pouch, a pair of baby socks tucked into the corner, perhaps a gift for someone she was visiting. It all looked ordinary, comfortingly normal, but something wasn't right. The woman's breathing turned faster. She gripped the arm of the chair so tightly her knuckles whitened. Sweat began to collect at her hairline. She leaned forward, one hand now clutching her stomach, the other bracing against the chair. "Ma'am, are you feeling all right?" the officer asked gently. The woman tried to answer, but only a sharp gasp escaped her lips. She doubled over, pain radiating through her body in a way she could no longer hide. That was when Copper snapped. His body stiffened. His tail dropped. His ears shot forward. Then, without hesitation, he barked. A loud, piercing, desperate bark that echoed off the walls of the hallway. David's heart lurched. Copper barked like that only when something was dangerously wrong. Not just suspicious, but life-threatening. David pushed open the door. The woman was collapsing forward, sliding out of the chair as her legs buckled beneath her. Her breathing came in short, panicked bursts. Her forehead glistened with cold sweat. She clutched her stomach again, but this time the gesture looked less like natural discomfort and more like agony. Copper rushed toward her, but stopped inches from her feet, lowering his head and sniffing frantically. He turned to David, barking again, as if begging him to understand the urgency. The TSA officer knelt beside the woman. "Ma'am, can you hear me? You're okay. Help is coming." The woman's eyes fluttered open for a second. Fear lived behind them. Fear not of the officers, not of Copper, but of something happening inside her own body. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "It hurts. It really hurts." David felt the gravity of the moment settle over the room like a thick fog. He had seen people in pain before. He had seen panic, stress, anxiety. But what he saw on her face wasn't any of those things. It was a look of someone whose body was failing faster than she could comprehend. He radioed immediately. "This is Officer Morales. We need emergency medical assistance to the secondary screening room. Now!" Copper circled the woman's side again, his nose hovering near the area she clutched so desperately. He whined, then pawed lightly at the floor. David recognized that signal. Copper wasn't alerting to aggression. He wasn't alerting to a threat against others. He was alerting to danger she was in. The TSA officer lifted the woman's bag onto the counter. Something about the weight and the way the bottom sagged unevenly made her pause. She pressed the lining gently with her fingertips and felt a subtle crackle beneath the fabric, something not typical of clothing or toiletries. She unfastened the seam carefully. A faint, powdery residue clung to the edge of the lining. It didn't look like anything harmful at first glance, but Copper's reaction told a different story. He barked again, sharply, then lowered his head beside the bag, sniffing intensely. His entire body tensed. David stepped closer and saw it too, the irregular stitching, the faint tear in the lining, the tiny dust-like particles near the seam. It was enough to confirm one chilling truth. Something dangerous had been hidden inside that bag, and something just as dangerous was affecting the woman now. Suddenly, the woman let out a cry unlike anything they had heard yet, a sharp, instinctive sound of pain that filled the entire room. Her body curled inward, her face contorted. Her breathing became ragged, uneven, bordering on collapse. Within seconds, paramedics burst into the room. They kneeled beside her, quickly assessing her condition. One checked her pulse, another her breathing. while a third prepared to lift her onto the stretcher. "What's happening to me?" she gasped, barely audible. "Please, please help. You're safe," one of the medics said softly, putting a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We're going to take care of you. Just stay with us." Copper let out a soft, mournful whine as they lifted her. His eyes followed her every movement. His body leaned toward her even as David held the leash firmly. It was as if Copper knew she was slipping away from something she couldn't fight on her own. As they rolled her out into the hallway on the stretcher, Copper tried to move with them, pulling the leash forward. David held him back gently, whispering, "I know, buddy, I know." And in that moment, watching the woman's trembling hands, her pale face, her whispered pleas, David acutely understood the depth of Copper's instincts. Copper wasn't just reacting to danger. He was trying to save someone who didn't know how to save herself. Whatever was happening inside her, whatever she had been carrying, was no longer just a hidden problem. It was now a race against time. And Copper had been the first to know. When the stretcher doors closed and the ambulance pulled away, the hallway outside the screening room seemed to exhale all at once. The tension that had tightened every shoulder, every breath, finally loosened. But for David and Copper, that release held no comfort. As the sirens faded into the distance, David felt Copper lean against his leg, restless and uneasy. Something in the dog's instincts had not quieted. If anything, the urgency inside him burned stronger. And David, who had learned to trust those instincts more than anything else, could not shake the feeling that the real truth, the heart of this crisis, was only just beginning to reveal itself. He did not know yet how right he was. At the hospital, the emergency room was calm but alert, the kind of controlled, focused medical staff know so well. Nurses moved swiftly. Doctors spoke in measured tones, and the sound of monitors blended with the low hum of activity. The woman was rushed through the double doors, her breathing shallow, her skin pale, her hand still clutched to her abdomen, as though holding together a pain she could not explain. Doctors asked a series of questions. Was she pregnant? Had she been experiencing pain before today? Had she taken any medication? Was she aware of anything unusual in her body? Her answers came out fragmented, interrupted by sharp gasps. I don't know, it hurts. Please. Her distress was so raw, so overwhelming, that even seasoned nurses exchanged glances of concern. Something was deeply off. She was wheeled into an examination room, and a team began immediate diagnostic procedures. One nurse gently placed monitoring patches along her chest and abdomen. Another prepared an ultrasound machine, rolling it to the bedside with careful haste. The doctor dimmed the light slightly, pressed the transducer against her lower abdomen, and moved it slowly, watching the monitor with a frown that deepened almost instantly. Within seconds, he leaned closer. The screen did not show what should have been there. No heartbeat, no fetal structure, no normal pattern pregnancy. Instead, something irregular filled the image. Something dense. Something layered. Something that did not belong inside a human body at all. The doctor inhaled sharply. "This doesn't look right," he murmured to the nurse beside him. "Call imaging. We need a full scan immediately." The woman cried out again, gripping the edge of the bed, her body curled in on itself, trembling with pain. The nurse squeezed her hand gently, whispering words meant to comfort. "You're safe. You're safe. We're going to help you." But the doctor knew time was slipping through their fingers. Whatever was inside her was causing severe inflammation, maybe worse. They needed answers, fast. Minutes later, she was wheeled into the imaging suite. The scan lit up a picture no one expected. Beneath layers of compressed fabric and tightly wound binding, there were several small, ruptured packets pressing against her abdomen. The contents were leaking, triggering a dangerous reaction in her body. It wasn't advanced technology. It wasn't a high-end disguise. It was a crude, desperate setup. Something meant to pass as pregnancy from a distance, but never meant to withstand movement or pressure. The binding had been wrapped so forcefully around her midsection that circulation was compromised. Her internal tissues showed signs of stress and trauma. It became painfully clear. She had been forced to bind these packets to her body. Some had torn or leaked, causing an emergency they were now fighting against. The doctor stood at the foot of the bed, absorbing the scan results. He had seen many things in his career, but there was something uniquely tragic about this case. This woman had walked into the airport carrying a burden that could have ended her life before anyone realized she needed help. Prepare an emergency procedure, he instructed. We need to remove everything causing pressure or leakage, and we need to do it now. Within minutes, a surgical team assembled. The lights brightened. Gloves snapped. Instruments were prepared. The air carried the familiar sterility of urgency. The woman, drifting in and out of consciousness, whispered something incoherent, her voice hoarse, her fear palpable. "You're going to be all right," a nurse assured her softly. "We're right here with you." The procedure began. Layer by layer, the doctors removed the constrictive wraps, carefully extracting the ruptured packets and treating the irritated tissue beneath. The deeper they went, the more the truth unfolded. She had not done this to herself. The positioning, the force, the complexity of the binding, none of it was a work of someone acting willingly. This was the work of coercion. This was the work of someone who used vulnerability as leverage. As the final packet was removed, the doctor breathed out slowly. "She's very lucky," he said. "If she had waited even another 20 minutes, she wouldn't be here." The room fell silent for a moment. Medical staff, accustomed to tension and tragedy, exchanged heavy looks. It wasn't just relief for her survival. It was a realization of how narrowly she had escaped a fate no one deserved. Across town, Copper sat beside David in the small waiting area of the hospital reserved for officers. The dog's ears twitched at every footstep, every distant sound. He sat rigid, alert, as though he knew the woman's fight wasn't over yet. David watched him quietly. "You knew," he murmured, "way before any of us. You knew she was in trouble." Copper didn't move. His gaze remained fixed on the hallway that led toward the operating rooms, as though he could feel the weight of her struggle all the way through the walls. Nearly an hour passed before a doctor finally walked toward them. His face looked tired, but there was a softness in his expression. "She made it," he said. "She's stable now. It was close, but she'll recover." David let out a breath he had been holding since the moment Copper first barked at the airport. Copper's body relaxed only a little, his muscles softening as though the news eased something deep inside him. The doctor continued. She wasn't pregnant. She was forced to carry something harmful, wrapped tightly around her midsection. It caused internal damage and a severe reaction. If your dog hadn't alerted you, we might not have gotten to her in time. David placed a hand on Copper's back, pride and gratitude washing over him. "Copper saved her," the doctor added simply. Those words hung in the air with profound weight, because they were true. Copper had sensed what no human eye could see. He had felt her danger before she even cried out. His instincts had cut through fear, secrecy, and pain, and given her a chance she could not have found alone. In that moment, David understood just how extraordinary Copper truly was. Not just a working dog, not just a partner, but a guardian with a heart tuned to the silent signals others missed. A being who sensed suffering even when it was buried beneath layers of fear and desperation. And somewhere down the hall, a woman who had nearly lost her life now had another chance at it. All because Copper refused to ignore the truth his instincts revealed. The first real quiet moment came hours later, after the machines had steadied and the danger had finally loosened its grip on her body. The doctors had done everything they could. Now all that remained was recovery, slow, fragile, but possible. David stood with Copper in the hallway as the sun dipped lower outside the hospital windows, casting long amber streaks along the floor. The day, which had begun with routine patrols and familiar greetings, had turned into something far heavier than either of them expected. Copper lay at David's feet, but remained alert, his eyes fixed on the door to the recovery room. He seemed to sense that something important was still unfinished, something the woman needed to share before any of them could understand the full truth. And he was right. When the nurse finally invited them inside, David stepped quietly into the dim room. Copper followed alongside, slow and respectful, as if he understood the delicacy of the moment. The woman lay propped slightly upright, her skin still pale, but her breathing steadier. Her hair, once neatly tied back, now fell in loose strands around her face. She looked small, vulnerable, but alive, For the first time all day, she met David's eyes without looking away. "You're the officer from the airport," she whispered. Her voice was rough, worn down by hours of fear and pain. David nodded gently. "I am, and this is Copper." Copper lifted his head just enough for her to see him more clearly. Something softened in her eyes. Gratitude, relief, and something deeper, something like shame trying to claw its way out of her chest. "I owe you both my life," she said quietly. "If he hadn't reacted, I wouldn't be here." Her gaze dropped to her hands, trembling slightly against the blanket. For a long moment she said nothing, as though gathering the pieces of her courage one by one. David didn't rush her. He sat down beside the bed, Copper settling in close enough that his warmth brushed against her hand. When she finally spoke again, her voice cracked under the weight of truth. "I wasn't traveling to visit family," she said. "I wasn't expecting a baby. I know you already know that." She paused, swallowing hard. "But I'm not a criminal. I didn't choose any of this. I didn't want it." David leaned forward slightly, his expression calm and open. "You're safe now," he said softly. "Whatever happened, you can tell us." Her breathing strained, not from physical pain this time, but from the release of a story she had carried far too long. She stared ahead at nothing, as if replaying a memory she wished she could erase. "I'm a single mother," she began. "My son is 6. His name is Mateo." Coppa's ears twitched at the name, as if even he understood the gravity that came with speaking about someone you love. "We've been struggling," she continued. "I lost my job 2 months ago. The bills kept building. The rent, the food, everything. I didn't know what else to do. And then someone approached me. A man." Her eyes dimmed with fear at the memory. "He said he could help. That it was simple. That I would only have to carry something across state lines and leave it with someone waiting for me. He said no one would ever know." She shook her head, gripping the blanket tighter. "He said they would pay me enough to catch up on everything. Enough to give my son what he needed. Enough to stop the eviction notice from coming again." David's jaw tightened slightly, not in judgment but in empathy. He'd seen this kind of desperation before. Desperation that led people to places they never imagined they would go. "At first I said no," she whispered. "But then he showed up outside Mateo's school. He told me that if I didn't follow through, he knew where my son played, where he slept, where he walked every day." He said all of this while smiling like he was discussing the weather. A tear slipped down her cheek. "That was when I knew I was trapped. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about keeping my child alive." Copper rose to his feet and placed his chin gently on the edge of her bed, as if offering a comfort only he knew how to give. She reached out to touch his fur, her fingers trembling against the softness. "They wrapped those packets around me so tightly," she continued. "I could barely breathe. I begged them to stop, but they wouldn't. They drove me to the airport and told me to walk calmly, to act like everything was normal. They said if I tried to run or tell anyone, they had people watching." Her breath hitched, and then it started hurting. So much worse than they said it would. I thought maybe it was just from how tight everything was. But then I started to feel sick, dizzy. I didn't know what was happening. And when your dog barked, she paused, choking back a sob. I wasn't afraid of him. Not really. I was afraid that if he didn't bark, if no one stopped me, I would die there, right in the terminal. And Mateo would never know why I didn't come home. The room fell silent, except for the steady beeping of the monitor beside her bed. Her confession hung in the air with the weight of truth, raw, heartbreaking, and terrifying in its simplicity. David finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "You're not alone anymore," he said. "We'll speak with investigators. We'll make sure you're protected. And your son, too. You did what you could to survive." And Copper responded because he knew you were in danger. She nodded slowly, her tears falling freely now. "I never thought anyone would help me," she whispered. "I thought I had to face this alone." Copper moved closer, resting his head against her arm. She let out a soft, broken laugh. "He knew before I even said a word," she whispered, running her fingers gently across his fur. "He knew something was wrong." David watched him quietly, his chest tightening with familiar emotion. a blend of pride and deep gratitude for the partner who always listened to the truths people didn't speak. And in that quiet hospital room, as the last light of evening faded into dusk, the woman's confession did more than reveal her story. It revealed something far more profound. Copper had not just saved her life. He had seen her pain long before anyone else could. The room fell quiet after her confession, the weight of her story lingering like a shadow against the dim hospital walls. David knew the healing she needed would go far beyond medicine. But he also knew something else. Her truth was not the end of crisis. It was the beginning of a larger mission. And Copper, still resting beside her bed, seemed to sense that their work was far from finished. As David stepped out into the hallway, Copper walked at his side with purpose. The dog's posture had changed. The nervous pacing from earlier had shifted into something else, readiness. It was as if Copper understood that the woman's survival wasn't the only life hanging in the balance. There were others, victims who had not yet been found, stories that had not yet been told. And Copper was determined to lead the way. The hospital lights hummed softly overhead as David made the call back to the airport command center. His voice remained measured, but the urgency was unmistakable. "We have reason to believe she wasn't the only one forced into this," he said. "There may be others traveling today under similar threats." The line went silent for a beat as his words sank in. Then the commanding officer responded with quiet intensity. "Understood. We'll initiate enhanced screening immediately." Within minutes, the airport transformed from its usual rhythm of travel into a coordinated, high-alert investigation. Officers revisited surveillance footage, examining faces, movement patterns, and travel logs. TSA agents increased behavioral monitoring in the security lanes. Additional K-9 units were brought in for support, but Copper was the key. He had sensed what no technology, no human, no protocol had detected. His instincts had pierced the facade of a woman forced into silence. Now, the airport relied on that same instinct to reveal the truth hiding among thousands of travelers. David returned to the terminal with Copper at his side. The atmosphere had changed. Officers spoke softly into radios. Supervisors stood by screens, studying incoming passengers. But most travelers had no idea anything unusual was happening. That was exactly how it needed to be. Copper led David down the concourse, nose lifted, scanning the air like he was reading invisible pages of a story unfolding around him. He moved past families chatting, business travelers rushing, elderly couples walking hand in hand. Nothing caught his attention until they reached the arrivals area. The moment Copper entered the crowded hall, his body stiffened ever so slightly. His ears tipped forward. His pace slowed. David felt the change instantly. "What do you smell, buddy?" he whispered. Copper lowered his nose, weaving between travelers, pulling gently but persistently. He approached the corner of the hall, where a group of arriving passengers waited for their luggage. Among them stood a woman wearing an oversized sweater, her arms wrapped tightly around her midsection. Her gaze stayed fixed on the exit. Her breathing looked uneven. Her posture, too rigid, too guarded, echoed the same fear they had seen earlier that day. Copper stopped a few feet away from her and barked, a low, strong alert. The woman froze. Her eyes darted toward Copper, then toward David, confusion flooding her face. She took a step back, shaking her head as if trying to convince herself that nothing was wrong. But Copper's instincts were undeniable. He barked again, louder. Two officers approached calmly. "Ma'am, could we speak with you for just a moment?" She hesitated. Her lower lip trembled. Her eyes filled with the same fear the first woman had carried. But she nodded. As the officers guided her gently aside, Copper moved closer, sniffing the air around her torso, confirming what his body already knew. David exchanged a look with the officers. "We need to get her somewhere safe," he said softly. They escorted her toward the secondary screening area. With each step she took, her resolve seemed to fracture. Finally, once the door closed behind them, she whispered, barely audible, "Please, don't let him find me." The pattern was unmistakable. Another victim. Another life pulled into danger by threats, pressure, and fear. And Copper had found her, back in the concourse, David's radio buzzed. We detained a male suspect outside the arrival's entrance. He was watching the crowd closely and seemed agitated. He matches the description provided by the first victim. David glanced down at Copper, whose muscles relaxed only slightly, as if acknowledging one victory, while sensing there were still more truths waiting to surface. "Bring him in," David said. "We need answers." The suspect was apprehended without incident, though he initially denied everything. But the evidence in his possession, phones, lists of names, unofficial identification documents, told a different story. Nothing graphic, nothing dramatic, but enough to indicate he had been part of a network that preyed on vulnerable individuals, coercing them into dangerous tasks under threats to their families. Copper's alerts had cracked open the door to uncovering the entire operation. Investigators worked swiftly. More names were traced. Possible routes and contacts were identified. The ripple of one dog's instinct had become the turning point in dismantling a chain of exploitation that stretched farther than any of them imagined. As the suspect was taken into custody, Copper sat beside David, gaze steady and calm. The dog didn't understand the legal procedures unfolding, the reports being filed, or the growing list of victims being located. But he understood something essential. He had found the people who needed help. He had spoken in the only language he knew: barks, body tension, unwavering focus, and the world had listened. David rested a hand on Copper's back, pride swelling in his chest. "You did good today," he said softly. "Better than anyone could ask." Copper's tail thumped once against the floor, subtle, restrained, but filled with quiet triumph. The crisis was not fully resolved. There were still investigations to complete, victims to protect, and justice to pursue. But the heart of the operation, the moment that shifted everything, belonged to Copper. Because sometimes the strongest guardians don't wear badges or uniforms. Sometimes they walk quietly beside us, listening to what we cannot hear, sensing what we cannot see. And sometimes their instincts are enough to save more than one life. The final pieces of the investigation were still unfolding when the sun began to rise the next morning, casting soft light across the hospital parking lot and illuminating a night that had changed more lives than anyone could have imagined. Yet even as officers coordinated follow-up efforts and investigators pieced together the broader network of coercion, there was one place where the story found its quiet heart: inside the recovery room, where a woman finally had the chance to breathe without fear. David and Copper returned later that morning, not as officers responding to crisis, but as visitors checking on someone they had fought to save. The hallway leading to her room felt different now, lighter, as though the weight that hung over the previous day had finally eased, replaced by fragile hope. Inside the room, the woman sat propped against her pillows. Her face still carried signs of exhaustion, but her eyes were clearer, no longer clouded by terror. And she wasn't alone. A small boy, no older than 6, sat curled at her side, his tiny hand wrapped around hers. His head rested gently against her arm, as if afraid she might disappear if he let go. When Copper entered, his ears perked and his eyes widened with cautious wonder. David paused at the doorway, quietly watching the moment unfold. "Mateo," the woman whispered to her son, "this is the dog who helped save Mommy." The boy looked at Copper with a mix of awe and gratitude, then slid off the bed and walked slowly toward him. Copper lowered himself onto the floor, his posture gentle and inviting. Mateo reached out a tentative hand and touched Copper's fur, his small fingers trembling just slightly. "Thank you," the boy whispered, his voice barely louder than a breath. Something in that moment, so pure, so simple, struck David with a force he didn't expect. He cleared his throat quietly, looking away for a second before stepping farther into the room. "You're safe now," he told the woman softly. "There are people assigned to your case. You'll have protection, and the investigation is moving quickly. They won't be able to hurt you or your son again." Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they weren't born from fear. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of release. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "You saved my life. You saved Mateo's future." David shook his head gently. "It wasn't me," he said, glancing down at Copper. "It was him." Copper's tail swept slowly across the floor, almost shyly, as though he didn't know how to handle such praise. But the woman reached down and touched his head with a tenderness that spoke louder than any words. "You saw me," she whispered to Copper. "Even when I tried to hide everything, you saw me." For a long moment, the room held nothing but quiet breaths, soft sniffles, and Copper's steady gaze shifting between mother and child. It was a stillness of healing, a place where fear no longer dictated the next step, where a new chapter began quietly, one heartbeat at a time. But healing wasn't just happening in that room. It was happening in David, too. As he watched Copper interact with Mateo, memories of his own loss rose gently in his chest. Not as a sharp ache he once carried, but as a reminder of how far he had come. Copper had filled the emptiness his wife's passing left behind. Copper had pulled him through nights when the silence was too heavy. Copper had reminded him, again and again, that connection can grow back even after life breaks you open. And yesterday, Copper had done the same for this woman and her child. It struck David then, how one dog's intuition, one moment of instinct, had not only saved lives, but had reshaped them. Copper had done more than prevent a tragedy. He had restored hope, dignity, and safety to people who believed they had none left. David placed a hand on Copper's back, grounding himself in gratitude. "Funny, isn't it?" he said quietly, almost to himself. "Sometimes, the ones who've been broken end up saving everyone else." The woman nodded softly. "He saved me because he understood something no one else did," she said. "People look at someone like me and make assumptions. They don't see the fear. They don't see the pain. But he did. And she was right. Copper didn't see the world through suspicion or judgment. He didn't question motives or appearances. He sensed harm, distress, and danger even when people tried their hardest to hide it. He responded not with force, but with urgency born from compassion. He barked because she was hurting. He alerted because she was in danger. He acted because he cared. As they prepared to leave the room, Mateo threw his arms around Copper's neck in a sudden hug. Copper froze for a moment, surprised, but then pressed his head gently against the boy's shoulder. A soft connection formed there, quiet but unshakable. That was the final piece of healing. A child's gratitude, a mother's newfound safety, a dog's unwavering loyalty. Outside the room, David paused at the window overlooking the hospital courtyard. The sky had cleared. Sunlight reflected off the glass in bright, warm streaks. Copper stood next to him, calm, steady, watching the people below move about their lives. "You did more than save her," David said softly. "You reminded all of us what it means to be brave, to trust instinct, to care without hesitation." Copper nudged David's hand with his nose. A small gesture, but strong enough to pull a smile from David's heart. And with that, the message of their journey took shape. Simple, powerful, unforgettable. Sometimes the greatest heroes don't speak in words. Sometimes they don't stand tall in uniforms. Sometimes they don't carry authority or weapons or commands. Sometimes they walk beside us on four quiet paws. They listen to what we try to silence. They see what we try to hide. They protect us even when we believe we're beyond saving. And in doing so, they remind us of something profound. The purest courage in this world often comes from the hearts that expect nothing in return. Copper didn't save the day for recognition. He didn't allure out of pride. He simply followed the call inside him, the instinct to help, to heal, to guard what is fragile. And because of that, a mother lived. A child kept his family. And the world witnessed again that the truest heroes are sometimes the ones who cannot speak at all.